This is Dan Schneider, and on this edition of the Dan Schneider video interview, I will be interviewing Bishop John Shelby Spong of the Episcopalian Church, and we will be talking about the nature of existence. It is the first of three shows that I will be doing with a theologian, Bishop Spong, and later with a physicist and a philosopher, and that will be coming up in just a moment. All right, I want to welcome Bishop Spong, and in this show, as I mentioned, I will be talking a little bit about the nature of existence, both from his own personal perspective and also his perspective as a man of faith. Bishop Spong, thank you for joining me in this discussion. And for those people who don't know of you or any of your works, could you just give a few minutes about who you are and what you've written and some of your basic tenets and beliefs?
Well, I'll try. It's hard to do that in a few minutes. I was the bishop of the Episcopal Church in northern New Jersey for 24 years. Prior to that, I was a priest of the Episcopal Church in North Carolina and in Virginia. My home is in the Bible Belt of North Carolina. I was raised as a fundamentalist. My church taught me that segregation was the will of God, that it was okay to hate other religions, and especially the Jews, that women were by nature inferior to men, and that gay and lesbian people were either mentally sick or morally depraved, and of course they quoted the Bible to justify all of those positions. And so my pilgrimage in life has been to come out of that kind of fundamentalistic Christianity and into well, it's hard to describe what I am today, but into a very different perspective where I think that Christianity begins to fade out into a more universal concept of God, not as a supernatural being above the sky, but as a permeating presence in the heart of all of life. And it's been a fascinating enterprise for me, and I've written books over the years. I think I've got 26 books in print. I write a weekly column on the web, which is probably the only non-fundamentalist adult study of the Bible that you can find on the web. And it's an attempt to engage the modern world without sacrificing the basic tenets of the Christian faith, but in the process reinterpreting those tenets so that they can, in fact, be in dialogue with the thought processes of the 21st century. Christianity, as it's practiced today, confronts the 21st century with a Bible written between 2,000 and 3,000 years ago, with creeds that were shaped by the 4th century, and with worship patterns that are basically still set in 13th century understanding of reality. And so it's a very difficult thing, I think, to call people into the Christian faith if you don't reform the Christian faith so they can speak in a modern accent to the modern world.
Well, thank you for that, Bishop. I want to get a little bit universal, and I was thinking of how to begin a question about something that's both as all-encompassing, but yet seemingly as nebulous to many people as existence. And I was thinking of a pop culture show. I had a few months ago interviewed some people who were the heads of a fan club of a show called The Prisoner. It was a show back in the 1960s, starred Patrick McGoohan, who was a big television star, as an ex-spy who was captured by some people and put on an island and tortured. And there was one particular existential episode called The General, in which featured this computer that the captors had come up with, and it was one of those 1960s room-sized computers that supposedly could answer any question. And our hero defeated it by typing in 3 letters, WHY, the question why, as the one question that this supercomputer couldn't answer. And the question being just why, anything instead of why, nothing. And that was one of the things that I wanted to, was one of the bases for this series of shows that I wanted to do. And so let me just put it out there, whether as a person or as a man of faith, why do you think there is something, existence, rather than nothing? I mean, do you see, you said you believe God is not just like a personal God or but is more like a pan-universal kind of thing. Why do you believe that there is something rather than nothing?
Well, I think the fact is that I live in a world where I experience reality. I don't experience nothing. I experience life in a variety of forms. I experience love in a variety of forms. I experience being in a variety of forms. And I don't know that I'm capable of asking the question, why is there something and not nothing? That's been a question that's been asked by philosophers over the centuries. I'd rather start with what is. We have being in the world, and we have to make some sense out of being. We have living things in the world. They have interesting characteristics. One of the things that fascinates me more about life than anything else is in all of its forms, from simple cells to complex thinking organisms. Every part of life is oriented towards survival. That is, the nature of life seems to me to survive. I don't know what that tells you about the meaning of the universe, but I think that's a reality with which I have to deal, because that's simply the reality of my experience.
Yeah. Do you differentiate then, say, between existence and life? Because you mentioned a God, and I don't know if you take the Bible as God created the universe literally, or as God, or as the universe God. But to me, it seems that their existence and life are things that are sometimes intertwined, but they're different, because a rock can exist, but it's not alive. But a rock is certainly an existent thing. So for you, is existence intertwined with life, or for example, when God, before, if God, if you take the biblical creating the universe, there must have been existence because God existed, so there was something existent. No.
Well, it's at this point that language itself begins to break down. Let me first of all say that I don't know of any modern educated Christian who would treat the Bible of God. That's the sort of tradition I grew up with, but that's only something that somebody who's never read the Bible could possibly articulate or understand. The Christian scriptures, the Old Testament and the New Testament, are the products of no more than 1000 BCE and maybe 140 AD or CE. That's a rather short period of time. And it's also a period of time in which we believe that the earth was the center of a three-tiered universe. We didn't know anything about germs or viruses. We thought anything we couldn't understand had to be a miracle. There was a whole different mindset, so that if anybody is still reading the Bible as if it's sort of the dictated words of God, I think that that's no longer something that has any intellectual credibility, and something I don't simply want to be in dialogue with. The whole purpose of the Christian faith, I think, is to interpret the reality of life. And yes, I do think there's a difference between life and existence, but I think they are related. That is, I think I am related to that rock that exists. It's because I think everything that is made out of the same stuff. Your body and my body is made out of the same material that you'll find on the farthest star and the farthest planet, or the farthest planet of the farthest star in the farthest galaxy of this universe. You and I can be broken down into material components, just like any other part of the physical order. Life did not enter this universe until maybe 3.8 billion years ago, so far as we know, and it seems to have entered this planet. We can't speak for what's beyond this planet, but life didn't enter this planet until about 3.8 billion years ago. And we, of course, had lots of things in existence before life came into existence. Now, can life develop out of nothing? No, I don't think so. I think it develops out of matter. But it's a new dimension of matter. So I think there's a relationship between everything that exists and life itself. But I don't think you can think of them as the same category, but they are deeply related.
Yeah, it seems to me that you have a much more scientific mindset than a lot of other people of various religions. So let me just ask you, just as a side note, with the biblical 7 days and 7 nights, I would take it then that you're one of those people who would subscribe to the idea that the biblical day and night were metaphors for being eons, countless eons of creation. Is that correct?
I think that was an argument used by biblical fundamentalists when they could no longer deny the fact that the universe is about 13.8 billion years. Then they had to try to find out some way they could bring it together with their creation story. But my goodness, the creation story is based upon a Babylonian myth that the Jewish people got when they were in exile. It has nothing to do with how the world began. And every culture, every people has a myth of creation. nobody in their right mind literalizes any of those myths, including the Christian faith. You've probably just been too many fundamentalists for too long. They are loud, but they are not where Christian scholarship is today.
So it seems to me that to you, religion or the Episcopal faith is basically a tool to craft or to find meaning in the cosmos. Am I getting you correctly?
Well, I'd say, first of all, the Episcopal faith would be a non-entity. There's no such thing as the unified position of the Episcopal Church on almost anything that I know of.
Yeah.
Nor is there a unified position of the Christian world on almost anything. It's an ongoing process. Truth is never bottled. Truth is always something one discovers in the process. In my career, we have engaged in very real debates, issues of racism, issues of equality of the sexes, issues of equality for homosexual people or for people of different sexual orientations. And those have been massive battles in the Christian church. And the Christian church is living in this real world, and we're always in dialogue between what we perceive to be the knowledge of the world. Charles Darwin changed the way we think dramatically. You cannot think the way we thought before Charles Darwin if you want to be relevant in this world. And I'm not particularly interested in being a ghettoized Christian off in some world trying to defend a pre-Darwinian point of view or pre-Stephen Hawking point of view or pre-Einstein point of view. That's just not where the world is. Now, people are going to be in those patterns because people just can't move but so far in one lifetime. But that's not where I think the Christian church ought to be engaging this world.
Well, you've used the word faith several times already. If we consider science as the search for factual basis, what place do you think that faith has in the world view or the cosmic view that you take?
Well, you see, I think faith is something that's living. It's not a noun I would use. It would always have to be kind of a verb. Faith means to perceive the ultimate meaning in life. If you go to the biblical text, what faith really means is not believing properly, the courage to step into the unknown. In the Epistle to the Hebrews, the writer says it was by faith that Abraham left Ur of the Chaldees, that is his known world, to go into the wilderness to start a new people. Faithlessness to me is to cling to yesterday's truth as if there is no tomorrow. Faith means to have the courage to step into the unknown and to wrestle with new realities and to see if you can find a way that you can incorporate those new realities into what you believe is the ultimate meaning of life.
Well, how do you think then, and speaking just the religious impulse as a way to view the cosmos, how do you then believe that religion arose in mankind? Do you think it arose from just the same urges of science to know things, or do you think it arose from something, say, more emotional and a more emotional reaction to the cosmos?
I would suggest it was both. My sense is that the original religious intimations in human life were coterminous with the emergence of self-consciousness. Until self-consciousness emerged in this world, we did not know that we lived in a medium called time. Time simply flowed through the non-self-conscious part of this world. Trees aren't aware of time. I'm not sure that animals are aware of time. They don't anticipate the future. They don't worry about the fact that they're mortal. But when self-consciousness entered the world, and we're not even sure when that was, I think it's far more recent than most people imagine. I would put it around 250,000 years ago, when the human beings crossed the boundary between being conscious life and being self-conscious life. Then we face the trauma of what it means to be self-conscious. It means that I know that I am alive, and if I know that I'm alive, I also know that I'm going to die. Conscious, you begin to want to protect yourself and to survive, and you know how weak you are, so we began to postulate the existence of a world that we couldn't see, that we could call to protect us. And then we developed all kinds of rituals which are designed primarily to manipulate this divine power, so this divine power would be on our side. We did sacrifices, and we did rituals, and we did rain dances, and we did all sorts of things to try to control God for our benefit. That's the very beginning. And then out of that beginning came all sorts of former religious traditions. The Christian faith was a child of Judaism. Judaism was probably born at the very earliest, about 1800 years before the Common Era. But there's been an awful lot of life before 1800 years of the Common Era. I don't see religion in any of its forms as ultimate. I see all religious forms as an attempt to walk into the mystery of life and try to make sense out of it, and I think all of them are changing. I would very much resist any attempt to suggest that there is one orthodox Christian position, for example, or that there is a single creed that we all had to say. The creeds that we use in my church were the products of the 4th century. They reflect a three-tiered universe with the earth as the center. I don't know anybody in a post-Copernican world or a post-Galileo world who still believes that the earth is the center of a three-tiered universe, but we recite creeds every Sunday that suggest that we do think that. So we've got to learn the difference between religious songs of antiquity that we join our ancestors in singing, which is what I believe the creeds are, and what it means to walk into the modern world as a thinking, feeling, believing person seeking ultimate meaning and seeking to try to identify all the sources of life, seen and unseen, even if you come to the conclusion that there is no such thing as a resource that is unseen. I would deny that, but I think that that's a legitimate debate.
So it seems to me that, as I had mentioned, this is the first of 3 shows. I'm going to be speaking with a physicist and a philosopher in a few weeks and a month. It would seem to me that your theological view is one that would walk philosophy. Am I correct?
Well, I would hope so. I did a debate some years ago with Christopher Hitchin on an independent television network in England. And the fascinating thing about that debate with Christopher Hitchin was that at the end of the debate, he went to the producer and he said that I was an illegitimate representative of Christianity because the kind of Christianity that he knew was one that he could knock over very easily. And he kept trying to throw these punches at me, and by and large, I agreed with his analysis. I just didn't agree with his conclusion. I think the God that Christopher Hitchin rejected is a God I also reject. And I think it's time for the Christian church to stand up and say those things in a very public and loud way. I hope that by being on your program, I can let people know that there's a difference in the Christian church. If you wanted to get somebody who would articulate the point of view that will be in strict debate with science and religion, you should get Pat Robertson or Ian Paisley or some of the other figures. Jerry Falwell, unfortunately, is not among the living today, but we could find plenty of those people. I get letters from them all the time. They write long articles and they defend truth that it cannot possibly be defended in any academic sense, but they're still living in a world that is not engaging the world that you and I participate in as citizens of the 21st century.
Yeah. Well, let me end this segment with a final question, and then we'll, next segment we'll move on a little bit. Several times you have mentioned the term truth, and I know with fundamentalists, truth is a capital T kind of Thor's hammer that people like to slam others with. For me, and I'm someone who comes from the arts, I tend to get kind of nervous when people throw around the word truth in arts, because to me, truth and reality are 2 different things. Reality is what is. I am interviewing Bishop Spong via Skype. That is a reality at this moment. The term Dan Schneider is interviewing Bishop Spong via Skype. That's either a truth or falsehood. So to me, truth or falseness is always a statement upon reality, and I think that's one of the things that people get a little screwed up with in they semantically when they're dealing with nature of reality. Do you sense that?
I think that's true. Also, remember that one of the primary purposes of organized religion is to give people security. That's at least what people think. And you can't have security if you're wavering. You've got to have absolute truth. The Pope has to be infallible. The Bible has to be inerrant. You have to be the one true church, or else your security needs are not met. But you see, my sense of what the Christian faith is all about is giving me the courage to walk into the unknown without possessing truth. I don't believe that my mind will ever possess the truth of God. to say nothing of the truth of the universe. That's just not within the capacity of the human brain. But we still have all of these systems, and anytime you get a system that claims that the Quran is dictated by Muhammad or by God through the mouth of Muhammad, or the Pope is infallible, or the Bible is the inerrant word of God, there's only one true religion and one pathway to God, you're dealing with people whose security is being threatened. There is no way that you can capture in the mind of a human being the ultimate truth of our universe, or of our God, or however you want to put whatever you call ultimate. And religious people need to learn that. Christianity does not give me security. It gives me the courage to embrace the radical insecurity of life and the radical insecurity of my world, and still to enter that world with integrity. That's a very different thing from what you will hear in most churches, where they're trying to give you the peace of mind. I think if Christianity gave me peace of mind, it would be destroying my humanity, because my humanity is supposed to be insecure and supposed to be probing into truth at all times and in all places, and has got to give up the illusion that I'll ever capture it.
Yeah, you make an excellent point. Before we end, I think that what you're saying is far more empowering than the kind of things that most people hear. And this goes beyond religion. People use it in politics as well. That I have the final truth. And to me, by saying no, you go out and you confirm. You're saying I trust that you are a being, that you can encounter reality, the universe, existence, however you want to term it, and come up with something that at least we can have a dialogue on if we disagree. And to me, that's much more interesting. I'd much rather deal with you and have you have an opinion a little off than rather you telling me, well, it's A, B, C.
Yeah. Well, fundamentalism is a human quality. You're right, it is in politics. When I hear people talking about the Constitution of the United States, they use the same words that biblical fundamentalists use when they're talking about the Bible. There is no book or no document that will ever capture reality if it's a product of time and space. At least the Constitution gave us the possibility of revising it from time to time with amendments. If we had the right to do that with the Bible, it'd probably create a great schism in the church, but it would probably move us a lot closer to reality and to truth.
Okay, so let's end the segment here, and when we get back, we'll pick up more of the conversation, and we'll do that in just a moment.
All right.
Talking about existence and all the corollary things that come along with being extant. Well, Bishop, that was quite an interesting first segment that we did. I'd like to pick up on that, and we talked a little bit about truth and reality, and let me just get back to sort of meaning in an existent universe, and the idea of personal meaning. A lot of people I've noticed, whether it's in religion or whether it's politics or in just life in general, I think get startled by what I call just because answers. You know, there was the famous geologist James Hutton who came up with the idea of deep time, going past the old Bishop Ussher thing about, you know, the Earth being 6,000 years old. And I think most human beings seem to be scared about dealing with things that are humongous or infinite and whatnot. And I wondered, do you think that religion, more so than science or philosophy, is adept at dealing with these things that are just because? You know, the universe exists. Why? Well, it just exists. Do you think that religion is especially keyed into that, whereas other?
Dan, I think you can find religious people that would certainly argue from that perspective. But the reality is, if you look at anything through a long enough telescope, you will find that great variety has always existed. Christianity is a relatively recent religion. Islam is even more recent, 5 or 6 centuries newer than Christianity. The oldest religion that we still have in the world is probably Hinduism, and that's only maybe 3 or 4 thousand years older than Judaism. If you go back far enough, animism was the primary religion that we've identified as sort of the first religious yearnings. But all religions seem to follow one path. They're trying to make sense out of life, trying to make sense out of existence, trying to make sense out of the universe. and they're doing it as people who know they are participants in the universe. A tree or a cow or a dog or a horse, they don't seem to know that they're participants in a great drama. Human beings do. We look back at ourselves, and we can even imagine that there was a universe without any human life in it, without life of any sort in it. The universe, as I mentioned earlier, is about 13.8 billion years ago, old, and life as we know it, and there may be life in the universe somewhere else that we don't know about, but as we know life, it developed on this planet, in this galaxy, somewhere about 3.8 billion years ago. And self-consciousness did not come into any living thing until maybe as recently as 250,000 years ago. So that we've got stages of life. You have single cell life, and you have multi-cell life, and then you have a division in life between deeply interrelated with each other, but very distinct. And the longer this difference has lasted, the more distinction there is between living things. And then you have the birth of consciousness. You know, is a lobster conscious? Is a clam conscious? Is an insect conscious? We certainly know a dog and a cat and a horse and a cow are conscious, but they're not self-conscious. They don't know that they're a cow, for example. They don't understand that there is a medium called time in which they're living. They don't remember when they were not born. They don't anticipate when they will die. They live in a very different kind of way from the way self-conscious creatures live. And so self-conscious creatures are always asking questions about why. And that's ultimately the religious question. You mentioned that in the beginning. Once you begin to deal with the question why, you're going beyond the limits that any human mind can ultimately transcend. And that's where the realm of religion, that's also the realm of philosophy, goes. Science does it a little differently. But we're all in the quest to find what is the meaning of life, what is the meaning of existence, what is the meaning, why are we here, where did we come from? Those are all deeply religious questions. And, I appreciate anybody who'd like to address those questions from any discipline's point of view, and I want to walk in dialogue with them. And I think that those who see in life itself or in the universe itself a transcendent meaning, I think that's also a point of view that needs to be heard in the world of science and in the world of philosophy, not just in the world of religion.
Yeah, meaning, we'll get back to that in a moment, but I want to pick up on the idea of sentience or consciousness that you brought up. And generally, people, when they talk about human beings' consciousness versus a cat's or a lobster's or an anemone's, they use the term sentience. So I'll use that term. Do you believe, like some people in science have argued, or even philosophers, the conundrum of Schrodinger's cat, whereas a cat is in a box, and if
Yes.
and
I know about
until you open the box, the cat somehow is in a state of flux. Do you believe that a person or any conscious being, let's say if it was an artificial intelligent robot or android, or if it was an alien from another planet that was equal or greater than human beings, do you believe that existence is somehow molded by the perceiver, the conscious act of perceiving the universe?
Well, that's a kind of question I don't know anybody would answer. Franklin Roosevelt used to say he would never answer an if question or a question that begins with an if. I don't know. And I think we need to say that we don't know. I experience consciousness. I experience other people as sacred people to me. I know what it means to love another, to love my wife, to love my children, to feel transcendent in that relationship. I, I know what that's about. And to me, that's where the meaning of life comes. So that the ability to give yourself away in love to another person is I think, a higher developed consciousness. And if I had the time and you were interested, I would make the case that what the Jesus figure does in the Christian story is not do all the miracles that we have attributed to him over the centuries. I think they can be explained in a wide variety of other ways. But he had the ability to step beyond the boundary of survival and to give himself away in love to others. And I think that opens him to a new level of consciousness, a new level of what it means to be human. And I think those of us who walk in his path are trying to find that same new level of consciousness and that same new level of life. And that is a transcendent dimension. When you love beyond your limits, when you can love another more than you love yourself, you experience a deeper sense of what it means to be human than most of us ever can achieve. And I think that's a vision that needs to be held up before the world. And that's one of the reasons why I remain deeply committed to the Christian story. But it has nothing to do with the literalness of the biblical narrative, for example.
So, as I'm hearing you, your idea that Christ, his function in I guess showing the believers a way to experience and to love and whatnot, as a corollary side benefit, that enables people to understand the cosmos in a greater and deeper manner. Am I getting that correct?
Yes, I think that's what I'm saying. I'm not sure that he's the only one. I think there have been human spirits through the centuries that have opened us to. But I think he's an important one, and he's the one in whose life path I continue to walk.
Let me just sort of get a little bit further out with the idea. You know, some scientists, for example, have come up in the last couple of decades with the idea that perhaps the cosmos is a computer simulation, and this gets back to me to the old notion of turtles all the way down. The Earth is the back of a turtle, and it rests on the back of another turtle, on another turtle, etc. There's the old Dr. Seuss story about Horton Hears a Who, about the smaller beings and whatnot. It seems to me that you then would be open to the idea that a cosmic creator, if you will, the artifice of existence, might not be some kind of divine being, but it could be, say, just some mortal being in some other kind of existence that maybe was doing a school science project. And if so, to me, that gets to the idea of, well, does it really matter we're here? So how we got here, or whether it's a totally mindless thing that happened, or whether there is an artifice, a divine or not, we're here and we have to deal with it. Do you take more of that kind of pragmatic approach, do you think?
Well, I'm really not sure I want to spend a lot of my time worrying about all the things you were articulating there.
Okay.
I would start out with, yeah, the fact that we are here, that makes a difference. And then you by the process of living, you discover some things work and some things don't work. If I had to describe God to you or to anybody else, I would not use human images. I do not think of God as a supernatural person who lives somewhere external to the world and who periodically invades the world to produce a miracle or to achieve a divine purpose. I think of God as the source of life, and I think if God is the source of life, then God flows through every living thing, and that if I want to worship this God, I do so by living fully. I think of God as the source of love, and I think love also flows through the universe. What love primarily does is to enhance life, and it's just as much an enhancement of life when it's a mother cat licking the fur of a baby kitten as it is when I love my wife. Uh, but the fact is, the more I love, the more I experience the meaning of life. And I think of God as the ground of being. That's a phrase I borrow from Paul Tillich, who borrowed it from Plotinus in the 2nd century. That tries to suggest that everything that is rooted in that which is ultimate. And I don't know how to call that name. I use the name God because I don't have any other name to use. But the fact is, I think there's something that's beyond all that is, in which we live and move and have our being, and that the more deeply you can penetrate that, the more deeply you understand life, and the more deeply you're able to become fully human, which I regard as the whole purpose of organized religion, to create a deeper and fuller consciousness, to free us to have the ability to give our lives away in love to the people who are around us. And that's a vision for humanity that I think we cannot lose. I think if we lose that, we finally will be the beneficiaries of genocide, because we will try to kill everybody that differs from us. And that's part of what I see going on in the world today. It's going on politically, it's going on religiously, it's going on economically. And it is sort of a frightening thing. The primary enemy of human beings today is human beings.
Let me uh, talk then about a little bit more about meaning, because uh, when we talk about existence, people seeking meaning, it seems to me people are always looking for their own personal meaning, whether it's taking a job, whether it's being married, whether it's reproducing, whether it's just mattering in some degree, either ephemerally or over centuries, if they're a creator or a scientist or inventor. Um, do you think that personal meaning is one of the driving forces of both the human looking outward into the cosmos, and also why they seek systems such as religion or philosophy or science? And if it is personal meaning, then naturally it's going to have to always be different for every individual. No?
Yeah, I think that's correct. Yes, I do believe that life is a quest for meaning and a quest for love. Uh, and I see this everywhere. I see it in religion, I see it in science, I see it in everything. And I don't know how you get beyond that. The fact is, most of us are not going to be remembered for more than 3 generations. Even a man like Millard Fillmore, who got to be the president of the United States, I would bet most people couldn't tell you 3 facts about Millard Fillmore's life today, nor is he terribly significant to anyone. So that there's not any great hope in having your memory be remembered for hundreds or thousands of years. You might turn out to be an Aristotle or a Plato or a Jesus or a Moses, but those are very few and far between. For the vast majority of us, we're going to enter this world unknown, and after a very short time, we're going to depart this world, and we're still going to be unknown. Now, the question is, what do you do with the time that you have? You're not going to create monuments. Most of us are not going to create monuments that will keep our memory alive very long. So what do you do with your life? Well, I look at people today and they try to find meaning in all sorts of ways. They find it in religion, they find it in politics, they find it in their church life, they find it in their friendships. But there's always some desire to create meaning and to do something that will be significant. I have a daughter who's a physicist, and she's just developed a machine, I guess you could call it, that she has built that uses only solar energy that can purify up to 10 gallons of water a day, no matter what the source of the water is. And it's a wonderful sort of project. She's been testing it down in Panama. Uh, and, and when I talked to her about it, and she's not a particularly religious person, but when I talked to her about it, she said, "Dad, this is my one chance to make a difference to the world." And that's very important to her. I have another daughter, don't mean to talk about all my daughters today, but I have another daughter who's a lawyer, and she's just been put in a position where she has a great deal of authority over shaping the court system of the state of Virginia. And she said to me, this is a chance I have to really be influential, to change the shape of my world. I think those are rather remarkable things, but I think that's in everybody. Everybody looks for some way they can make a difference. And the people that go out and shoot presidents, now they're looking for their 15 minutes of immortality and fame. Or at least that seems to, when you interview these people, that's part of what motivates them. So that there's part of the human experience is to seek for meaning, to seek for love, to try to find something that makes the world, which seems so impersonal, deeply personal. And I just think that's part of the nature of our humanity, and I think we need to encourage that.
Yeah. Do you believe that? Because I was actually contacted by a website about a month or so ago called Excellence Reporter, and they were interviewing or sending around this question to a lot of famous people and people on the internet asking about the meaning of life. And my answer was, I think that if life has a meaning, I think is, well, I don't know if life has a meaning, but that the purpose that I have or any individual has is to create my own meaning. And I think that's one of the most empowering things, is that as a sentient being, I can choose to do good. You know, if I have a hammer, I can choose to bash someone over the head and be a murderer, or I can build an orphanage for the poor kids in my town. Do you think that that's one of the things that existence or life has that we have, that to me that's the most empowering thing, that each of us has an agency, that we can do this, that, or the other thing?
Yeah, I think that's true. I would also say that to be a human being is a really unique thing. We're the only creature that can fantasize about the shape of this universe. The universe regards every human being as essentially unimportant.
Yeah.
But that individual is the only one who knows how the universe works, who can postulate the fact that there was a Big Bang 13.7 to 8 billion years ago, and that matter was spewed out into the vacuum, whatever it was, and that we know about that. Now, no animal knows about that, and we can anticipate the end of this universe. This universe is like everything else; it's mortal and finite. I don't know if it'll come through the big crunch, where we'll all recede back into an infinitesimally dense bit of matter, reversing the Big Bang, or whether the light of the sun will simply go out as stars do explode and disappear all the time to death. I don't know how it's going to end, but I know we can contemplate it. So here we are living in 2015, and I'm living in New Jersey in 2015, and I'm able to sit in my study and to contemplate the beginning of this universe and the end of this universe. And though I may be terribly insignificant as an individual, I have the capacity to raise these infinite questions about all that is. I think that on one side, human being is infinitesimally small, and on the other side, human beings are enormously gargantuan in size to be able to do the things that we human beings do, and we're capable of enormous good, and we're capable of enormous evil. It's a fascinating study to look at human life, and I think the job of religion is not to make sense out of it, but to make it as positive as possible, to make our contributions be in favor of life, in favor of love, and in favor of enhancing the being of all that is. This is why in the Christian church, the battles in which I've been engaged over my career have been rather personal battles. They've been about segregation and about racial acceptance and about equality for women and about equality for gay and lesbian people. But for the life of me, I don't think you can put yourself on the side of diminishing the humanity of any child of God for any purpose. And that becomes very controversial. And part of what you have going on in the religious right today, in the political arena, is that they are really upset because they've lost all the battles. You know, they don't have the right to pray in public schools anymore, and they people have the right to get a divorce, and gay people have the right to get married, and women have the right to go to universities and become PhDs and to head up corporations like Hewlett Packard. All of the things have changed in their world, and they still are trying to protect the authority of basically white males, and that's a losing cause. It's a losing cause religiously. It's a losing cause politically. But that's what goes on in our world, because human beings are so grand in their potential and so tiny in their significance.
I wasn't going to get into it, but since you mentioned a couple of times the idea of evil, I wanted to ask you just as a side note: do you believe that evil is something that springs from consciousness or sentience, or do you believe that it's something outside that affects the?
I don't think anything's outside.
Okay.
I think evil is the flip side of survival. If everything in life is oriented to survive, if that's the nature of life, is that we are driven by our biology to survive, then evil comes out of our threat, the threat to our survival, and we respond negatively to it. And we can do that. You know, we can be genocidal. Christian people in the West killed 6 million Jews in the Holocaust. That's an incredible charge to place against this religious tradition. But it didn't, it grew out of 2,000 years of anti Semitic hatred, too, which we can document very easily. But I think, see, when Christians got to the place where Jews survived, the Christians would not survive. And so they decided to kill the Jews. It's going on in the Middle East today. If the Sunnis survive, the Shia will not survive. So they're going to kill each other until one of them alone remains, or until they get tired of killing each other and decide to try to live together. But we've had that go on forever and ever. And you see it You see it in things as mundane as football rivalries. You talk to somebody down in Texas who went to the University of Texas, and they start talking about somebody that goes to Texas A&M, and you get this most incredible kind of negativity toward people who are different. It's sort of, it's in everything. Patriotism is sort of the national side of that. American politicians talk about manifest destiny and exceptionalism, and they don't realize that every nation thinks it's got a manifest destiny and it's exceptional. Every people that have ever been born in this world believed on some level that they were God's chosen people. Now, the only problem with that is as soon as you think that you are a member of God's chosen people, you can think everybody else is God's unchosen people. And if God didn't choose them, then you can do anything you want to them. So we have this evil stuff is always on, but it's the flip side of life. And I don't believe there's a devil, for example. I don't believe there's an incarnation of evil somewhere. But I do think that it's the potential for life you make.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've noticed, whether I'm talking religion or other things, people always tend to separate themselves from the cosmos. Excuse me, we talk about the cosmos as if it's out there. Well, the cosmos is you, the cosmos is me, the cosmos is a pencil on my desk. It's all around us. You can't extricate yourself from existence from the cosmos. And I think people, when they try to do that, that might be one of those things that causes people to react in that evil way, the other, in that this is different, this is separate from me, I am good, I am better, I have to be separate. But if you have this viewpoint that, I am here, that rock that I mentioned is also part of the cosmos, I just have the advantage of being able to look at the cosmos where the rock doesn't. I think that kind of thing, it resolves a lot of things. But uh, have you ever heard or read the book by Steven Pinker a few years ago where he was talking about how human beings have gotten less aggressive and violent over the centuries, even the 20th century with the Holocaust and World War II and the world wars, that we were actually killing less than a lot of hunter-gatherer societies. Do you think, for example, that we are on the right track then as human beings?
I do think that there is a rise in consciousness. Just 200 years ago, we had no great objection to enslaving people. 100 years ago, we had no great objection to treating women as if they were incompetent women, incompetent human beings. They couldn't vote in this country for president until 1920. They couldn't go to any of our private universities or our state universities until basically after World War II. And we spent a great deal of energy trying to prosecute and persecute gay and lesbian people because we thought they were abnormal or different. We didn't recognize they were just a minority, part of the human spectrum. But you see, what you say about the universe, I also say about God. I can't define God, and I don't think God is an entity that could be defined. I think God is a verb that needs to be lived. If we think of God as a noun, we've got to define God. If we think of God as a verb, we've got to live God. And I think that's where we're going to find the difference. And that's the place where I think religion will finally enter into the dialogue of the world and make a significant difference.
All right, well, let's end this segment on that note. In our final segment in the interview, we'll talk a little bit more and wrap things up, and we'll do that in just a moment. Talk a little bit more with Bishop Spong about a few other sundry things, and then I'll give him a final closing statement. Bishop, I wanted to talk to you a little bit then about maybe the history of religion. And one of the things that I myself am not religious. I was raised a Missouri Synod Lutheran.
And you're not religious.
But I was wondering, in the evolution of religious or theological thought, I was always taught that monotheism was an advance over polytheism. And I'm wondering, do you agree with that general idea? And if so, why do you think?
Well, I'd say, first of all, that monotheism isn't practiced anywhere that I know of today. Christianity has compromised monotheism with the postulation of angels and saints and all sorts of other people who are able to give divine support and help in a variety of circumstances. The way religion developed is that we started by attributing to every living thing a spirit. There was a spirit of the tree, there was a spirit of the river, there was a spirit of the woods. I remember driving through parts of Thailand some time ago, and our driver would blow the horn when he came to a particular part of the highway. And after this happened 2 or 3 times, I inquired as to what he was doing. And he said that when the highway was cut through those woods, they had violated the spirit of those woods. And so when he goes through this area, he toots his horn to acknowledge the spirit of the woods. So animism is still alive and well in parts of the world. When it developed later, when we got into the tribal phase of human history, that we thought of God as after the analogy of the tribal chief, and that's sort of the beginning of monotheism, but it was a tribal monotheism. The God of Israel was a God called Yahweh, and the God of the Moabites was a God called Marduk. But as these people began to interact with each other, they had to recognize that there was more than one God. And so then the question became, who is the real God, or who is the false God, or who is the competing God? And after a while, as the world gets smaller and smaller, today we're still not monotheist. We have God divided into three major religious segments of the world. The Western world is Judeo-Christian, the Middle Eastern world is Islamic, and the Far Eastern world is Buddhist Hinduist, with all of the varieties that go into that. But all of them sort of believe that there's only one God. The competition is to whose God is the real God. Well, I think we've got another stage to go in human development, and we'll get there, when we recognize that there are many paths to the one. I walk the Christ path, probably because I'm a child of the West. It'd probably be impossible for me to walk the Christ path if I had been born in Nepal, for example, or if I'd been born in Iraq. But I would walk the Islamic path, or the Buddhist path, or the Hindu path. I think if you walk your path long enough and faithfully enough, you will transcend the boundaries of all religion. I don't think God is a Christian or a Jew or a Buddhist or a Hindu or a Muslim. I think God is beyond all of those. And if you walk far enough into your tradition, I think you transcend the limits, and then you can sit down with your fellow travelers and you can say, this is what Christianity has given to me. This is what I've received because I walk the Christ path. And it is so important to me that I want to share it with you. And the Buddhists can say, and this is what I've received by walking the Buddhist path, and it's so important that I want to share it with you. And so we'll get to the place, I think, ultimately, not in my lifetime or yours, Dan, but we'll get to the place where the contributions of all the great paths into the oneness of God can be celebrated, and we can accept the benefits that have been received by those who have walked those paths, and we don't have to give up the benefits of the path that we have walked, and we can enter into a new state of human consciousness and of human religious development. And I think that's where we're headed. And I think the alternative to that is that human beings will not survive their own murderous activity toward one another. So I think there's always the battle between whether we're going to be a universal human community or whether we're going to be so fratricidal that we finally wind up and setting off an evolutionary path so that maybe the cockroaches in 6 billion years can produce something that achieves self-consciousness again. We might have hard, crusty heads at that point. But, I think the process will go on because I think there's a bias in this universe toward life. I think there's a bias in this universe toward consciousness. And part of that bias is what I think the reality that the word God points to is all about.
Do you think that then any sentient being, whether let's say in the next 30, 40 years we develop artificial intelligence, or let's say within 100, 200 years we, through one of our telescopes find an Earth-like planet and, we find creatures maybe not too dissimilar from ourselves. Do you think that, just as you said, there's a bias toward life, do you think that once a certain level of consciousness is reached, do you think that it's likely that an alien uh, may have their own kind of view of the cosmos, of a god, of a theological point of view? Do you think that's almost likely, or could it be totally alien and we're just, we're just the outliers in the universe.
I think you've been reading too much science fiction. Your life, let's look at life for a moment. 180 million years ago, the dinosaurs ruled this planet. They were the top of the food chain. They didn't have any natural enemies, and they assumed that they would rule forever. Now, something happened in our environment about 180 million years ago that rendered the dinosaurs extinct and opened the way for the mammals to begin their rise to ascension. And you and I are in evolution. I don't. The dinosaurs didn't have any idea that there was something would come up that would end their existence, and we human beings, well, we might contemplate that. We can contemplate a nuclear holocaust. We can contemplate global warming that will finally destroy the life of this planet or make it impossible for conscious creatures to continue to live on this planet. We can contemplate that. But the fact is that I don't know what the future is. I just know that as I look at the universe, I find that there's a bias toward life. And if we have a nuclear holocaust, for example, and reduce life on this planet to the level of the cockroaches, and give the cockroaches 600 billion years, I think that the evolution of life and consciousness will go on, and it'll look different. But I think that there's this bias in this universe toward the development of life and toward the development of consciousness and toward the development of self-consciousness. So I don't know how to talk about that, and I don't want to speculate. I haven't got time in my life to speculate about things I can't control. But I do believe that there are certain principles that we can perceive today that will still be operative, no matter what happens in this world.
About a dozen years ago, a friend of mine who's an atheist had given me a book called Religion Explained by a Frenchman named Pascal Boyer. And his theory of why religion arose was basically an evolutionary one, that fear or an excessive paranoid fear of the thing behind the bush that you couldn't see is what saved the people that survived. For example, if you had a particularly bold caveman that would hear grunting and groaning behind a bush, well, a saber-toothed cat would come out and kill him, so he didn't survive to propagate. But the person who was ultra cautious did. I'm wondering, do you think something like that, the self-preservation, that there's a self-preservative strain within the impulse for religion, or for other ways to look at the universe? Do you think there's a strain of that?
I think that it's not in religion. I think the strain of survival is in every living thing. I spent some time in the Amazon rainforest looking at life. I found the most remarkable combinations of life there, and the most remarkable developments in the natural world. For example, in the rainforest, we would find a hornet's nest always in a tree above where an ant's nest was. And this was so regular that I asked about it. And it seems that the survival of the ants and the survival of the hornets depend upon each other.
Yeah.
It's almost as if Henry Kissinger went down and worked out a mutual support treaty between the two.
Yeah, symbiosis.
The primary enemy of the ants is the anteater. So the anteater would climb up in the tree and devour the whole ant's nest as an hors d'oeuvre. But the wasp in the top of the tree would attack the anteater with their stingers and would drive the anteater away. So they saved the ants. And on the other hand, there's another variety of ants that would never pass an ant's nest, but they would come up, if they could pass an ant's nest, they would come up and they would just eat all the larvae of the wasp, and the wasps, armed only with their stingers, were very ineffective against an insect as small as a different brand of ant.
Yeah.
And so these army ants, they were called, would never go past a regular ant's nest. So the regular ants protected the wasps, and the wasps protected the ants, and this is a product of life. And you find that all over. We found parakeets who would live off the fruits of the forest of the Amazon rain area, but the primary nutrients were in the seeds of the fruits, and the seeds were toxic. And so the parakeets over the years developed a pattern of eating anti-toxic dirt to get their alka-seltzer into themselves before they had dinner. And so they would survive in this normal pattern. The world of nature is so full of patterns that have developed in order to survive. You take even a plant and put it on one side of your house and move it to the other side, the plant will turn so that it can catch as much of the glint of the sun as possible. Survival is in every living thing. The nature of life is to survive. And I think that's, we human beings are self-conscious about that. The plants are not, but survival is still driving all that is. And I think that's where life is going to be understood and where it's going to be found. And, I press beyond that. I believe there's a source of life that is manifested in every living thing. I think there's a source of love that's manifested in every living thing. I think there's a ground of being that's manifested in every living thing. And I call that source God. And I worship God by living and by loving and by having the courage to be everything that I can be. And to me, that's what the essence of the Christian story is all about. And that's what religion is all about. And that's why I think it's still so very important.
Well, before I get to my final question for this interview, since you've mentioned love several times, uh, you speak of love in a way that's different than a lot of people tend to. You almost it almost seems to me that you speak of it as an animating force unto itself, as something as essential as food or breathing or whatnot. Could you just for a minute or two just explain what you think love's place within existence is?
I think love is that which enhances life. Uh, and I don't think you live fully until you know what it means to be loved fully. And I see that again going all through the universe. I see it in the care of an ant's nest, how they organize themselves for the benefit of the whole ant community. I see it in the natural world. We went to Kruger Park when I was studying life in South Africa, and I watched the survival dance between all the various animals in the wild. It's the biggest part of the world where you can go and watch animals in the wild in their native habitat. I would watch the relationship between the tribe of, they're basically a variety of deer. Sometimes they were called springboks and sometimes they were called smaller. But I watched the relationship between these and the predators, the great cats. And everybody knows that everybody's in somebody's food chain. But there were all sorts of signals that meant the tribe could survive, even though periodically they had to sacrifice some of their members. There was even a story, and I don't know whether it's true or not. There was even a story that some of these herds of deer would put their older and less productive members out on the edges to make them the vulnerable ones to the lion or the panther is only going to cut one out of the tribe. He's not going to kill the whole tribe. He's just going to have dinner. And so you put your older and less productive people as sort of a sacrificial offering to save the whole tribe. I told people they probably ought not to tell Sarah Palin about that it would not, that'd be part of her conspiracy theory about Obama's health care program. But that's the thing that impresses me. It impresses me that all organized life, biology, all living things are organized so as to maximize their survival. And love to me is the thing that lifts you out of existence and gives you personhood. And I don't know how people live without it. I'm in, again, my personal life, you don't need to know a great deal about it, but my first wife died in 1988. So I know what it means to lose the primary person in your life. I also know what it means to live in the radical aloneness of that widowed existence. And I know what it is to remarry a year and a half later and to live in the love of my incredible wife and to see how life is meaningful and how it's enhanced and how the deeper you love, the more alive you are, and how the more you give your life away, the more life you have. These things that seem to be, I don't know what word to use, these things that seem to be in paradox are actually true. It is in giving that you receive. It is in loving that you are loved. It is in living that you understand what death is all about. And so these paradoxes continue to make sense to me from within my frame of reference as a religious person, but a religious person who is in dialogue with the world that I inhabit as a citizen of the 21st century.
Well, that's an interesting definition of love. Let me ask a final question, and then I'll give you a closing or final statement on whatever you'd want in this vein. A final question that I would like to ask in this interview is that I don't know if I'm sure you're probably familiar with the idea of qualia, which is a scientific term for saying that each of us experiences something. For example, if we see a stop sign, my red, well, there's no way we can necessarily know that what I look at the color red is what you see as red. Or if you were to listen to a note that's an A, or whatever, a B on the musical scale, are you hearing it exactly the same way that your wife might? And I'm wondering, since it seems to me that science cannot prove nor disprove that we all experience the cosmos existence in the same exact way, do you think there's something significant to that? If, let's say, we believe that there is a creator, as you do you think that maybe that was planned or perhaps as something to give life a little or existence a little extra spice, make us each a bit more individuated? Am I making any sense, Bishop?
Not a great deal, but
Okay.
what we do is we agree to live by symbols. Now, I don't know whether what you see as red is what I see as red, but if we both don't stop when the light is red, we can create a lot of havoc. So we have a sort of community of agreement that,
Yeah.
that the color, that whatever it is, the color we see means a certain thing, and so we abide by that. And if you live in a metropolitan area like New York, as I do, you if you don't abide by that common understanding, life is chaotic. You don't go onto a highway on the wrong. You don't go on the exit side if you're entering. It just creates enormous distortion. But so we've all tempered our individuality by learning how to live respectfully to one another. And when somebody doesn't, it becomes a headline story. But I don't want to speculate about what people see. I just think that there is a certain order to life, and that we now have maybe 8 billion people in this world, maybe more than that. And we're having to learn to live in an interdependent way. Individualism was, and I don't know what's going to happen to the world. I don't know how far we can sustain life. Can we sustain 16 billion people in this world? I don't know. I'm not going to be around to worry about that, and I've got time to worry about that in my life today. But those are the questions that I don't think make much sense. I think what we've got to do, what I've got to do, is to live my life today with as much meaning as I can. And my understanding of how I do that is that I learn to love others more than I love myself. I learn to give my life away for the sake of other people. I learn to transcend my own survival needs in order to assist others in their survival quest. And that's the place where I find life becomes meaningful. That's the place where I think God is present, however God is defined. And as I say, God to me is a verb to be lived and not a noun to be defined. So I don't spend a lot of time trying to define who God is. I spend my time trying to experience what God is.
Well, Bishop, let me just let you have, if you want, a few minutes to say anything you want in that vein or in any other vein, if you wish. And
I recite my creed or my mantra. I cannot tell anybody who God is or what God is, nor do I think anybody else can do that. I can only tell people how I believe I've experienced God, and I might be delusional. I have to always be facing that, but I don't think I am. I experience God as life calling me to live, and the more deeply I live, the more I think I understand what God is. And the only way I know how to worship God is by living fully. I think of God as a source of love, and the only way I can worship God is to love wastefully, to love beyond my limits, to get rid of all my barriers that separate me from other people, which means all my prejudices. And the more deeply I can give myself in love to others, the more I believe I make God visible. And finally, I experience God as the ground of being. And if God is the ground of being, the only way I can worship God is by having the courage to be all that I am capable of being. And the only way I can act out that God is to give other people the courage to be all that they can be. So the task of my worship is to help fully and to be all that they can be. And that's the pattern that I think enables me to walk into my world, to join hands with science and philosophy and anybody else who's trying to understand the nature of this reality, and to see worship as an ultimate dimension of what it means to be human.
Well, Bishop Spong, thank you for your time. It's been an impassioned and enlightening interview. For those who have enjoyed the interview with the bishop, you can look below this video and you'll see a link to his website, johnshelbyspong.com, to find out more about the bishop and his beliefs. And as I had mentioned earlier, this is the first of 3 interviews. In the coming months, I will also be speaking with a philosopher by the name of Tyron Goldschmidt and a physicist named Adam Frank, and having similar discussions. So again, Bishop Spong, thank you for your time. It was a pleasure.
Dan, thank you. I enjoyed being with you.
All right,
Goodbye.
thank you.